I'll take it home and tailor it.
Hey guys, welcome to a very interesting TFL Today show because we've got some big news, Tommy. What is that big news?
Well, there's been all sorts of Ford management shakeup that's gone on in Detroit.
Yeah, and before we get to that, let me introduce the team for today's live show. To my right is Tommy Micah, and to my left is our new teammate,
Hey, Charlotte Roadcap.
Yeah, Roadcap, who will be minding the computer and asking questions and replying to your questions. So let's get right to it. The important shakeup that happened today, or maybe over the weekend, was that Mark Fields, the 3-year, long-time, Ford employee, he was CEO for 3 years at Ford, is now gone. And that is big news because, let's face it, there are only 3 American car companies, and when a CEO is replaced, it's big news. And he was replaced by Jim Hackett, who is now the new president and CEO of Ford. Jim came from Steelcase.
Yeah.
And he replaces Mark Fields, who replaced Alan Mullally. And I'll go into all that in a second. But Charlotte, why don't you go over some of the other changes that happened at Ford?
Well, there were a decent amount of new people coming in. We had Jim Fairley being appointed Executive Vice President and President of Global Markets. Joe Henricks, which was promoted to Executive Vice President and President of Global Operations. And then,
You know, it's
yeah, we wrote it down on the board.
Yeah.
Mary Calborn, Vice President and President of Mobility.
Yeah.
And Mark Truby, Vice President Communications and elected a company officer, and he replaces Ray Day, who previously filled that position.
Yeah, and Ray Day was kind of the guy that we dealt with. He was the head of communications for Ford. And by the way, Jim Farley, sorry. Does that last name sound familiar to you? Farley?
Farley, yeah, a little bit.
Yeah? How about you?
No.
You guys too young? There was a famous
Maybe.
actor who was, I believe, his cousin. Anyway, let's get right to it and talk about the big news, and that is that Mark Fields is now gone. And before we get into that, let me kind of talk about the history of Ford. So back in 2009, as you guys know, we were selling about 16 million cars a year in the United States, and the automotive market just completely melted down. So we went from about 16 million units, and that's the way that we talk about cars in America, not cars, but units, vehicles, to about 10 million. So imagine that, Charlotte. Imagine like if you were at a McDonald's and one day half of your customers didn't show
Yeah,
up.
definitely. The market shares of Ford decreased 40% since Mr. Fairley took over, and then also it has decreased 10% since January 1st of this year, which is pretty significant.
So in 2009, we saw this meltdown in the American car market, and basically the government stepped in and helped bail out the 3 automakers, except for Ford. Ford
Yeah.
did not get bailed out. And
Definitely.
what Ford did, which was interesting, now Ford is a very tightly held company, right? It's still owned by the Ford family, still controlled by the Ford family to a large extent. It's a publicly held company, but nevertheless, Ford owns and controls a lot of the company. And what
Yeah.
they did was, they did something very unusual. They went outside of the company and they brought in this CEO by the name of Alan Mullally. And Alan was the former CEO of Boeing, and they did something that was unheard of for Ford, because keep in mind, this is a very tight, very closely held company. They said, or maybe Alan demanded, that they give him control, that they let him do what he wanted to do, because before, the Ford family controlled a lot of kind of the way that Ford ran the business. So the first thing that Alan did was he introduced a concept for the company called One Ford. And One Ford was the fact that, for all you youngsters out there, once upon a time, of course, Ford is a global company, so they have operations in China, in North America, in Europe. And what they do is they would build different cars for different markets. So the Ford Focus that you would buy here was different from the Ford Focus that you would buy in Europe, and so on and so forth. So we would always have this kind of car company that built different cars. And Alan said, knock that off. We're going to build one car for the entire world. And so the Focus that you see in Europe is the same Focus that you see here. And that did a couple things. First and foremost, it made the brand much more global in that it built the same cars around the world. It also cut costs, because you didn't have to have separate toolings and separate development
Yeah,
for Europe and for Asia and for America. And Alan was hugely successful. And the other thing that Alan did, which was unheard of at the time, was, so both FCA, which wasn't FCA at the time, that became later, but Chrysler and GM basically took money from the government. They took billions of dollars in money to basically stay in business. And there's a lot of controversy around that. You know, a lot of people believe that the government, specifically the Obama administration, shouldn't have bailed out the two American car companies. But there's an old saying, guys, and that is, you know, what's good for GM is good for America. And that certainly was the case probably in the 30s and the 40s. Now the saying might be reversed a little bit, and that is what's bad for GM is probably bad for America. So if the Obama administration had let the two American companies basically go under, Ford and Chrysler at the time, it probably would have been a horrific knockoff effect on the economy.
Wasn't it GM and Chrysler were bailed out though?
Yeah.
Well, you said Ford and Chrysler.
No, I said, okay, sorry, GM and Chrysler.
Yeah.
So, because it's not just the companies, it's not just Detroit, right? To build a car, or in this case, a truck, you need thousands of parts. And there are a lot of part manufacturers that have to go and supply all that to the car companies. So if Ford goes out of business, if GM goes out of business, and if Chrysler went out of business, all those down chain suppliers would have gone out of business. And so think about the knockoff effect. Anyway,
Yeah.
Ford did not take government money. What Alan did was he did something very, I think, smart, and that is he went and borrowed against the Ford brand, and he borrowed billions of dollars. So he went to the banks and he said, hey guys, we need this money to stay alive because obviously we're not selling as many cars. Will you lend us, I think it was like $30 billion. It was, you know, it was a lot of money. And eventually he repaid that, and a lot of people felt that that was a really good move, and so they rewarded Ford by buying more Ford products. And then eventually he left the company, and Mark Fields, who was kind of the wonder kid of Ford, took over as CEO, and he has tried to take that company and make it more of a mobility company, and that may be ending right now. And Tommy, you and I were in Detroit this year. Let's face it, guys, Detroit is the most important conference of the year. Gosh, who keeps coming into our offices? It's really frustrating. It's the most important car show of the year. And that's because it's the hometown of all three. And so me and Tommy were at Detroit this year, and Ford, of course, has a press conference. They rent out the entire Joe Louis Arena, which is next to Cobb Hall. And so me and Tommy went to this Ford press conference, and we were expecting to see what? Can you guess what we were expecting to see?
I'm guessing probably Bronco
Yep.
and also the Ranger.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
we're expecting to see the new Bronco and the new Ranger. So we're sitting there along with 2,000 other people, all the dealers, right, all the world's media, and we're hoping to roll out the new Bronco and Ranger. And what ends up happening is the first literally 22 seconds of that news conference was a promo video for the Bronco and the Ranger, and then the news conference took a hard turn left, and it became about a TED Talk.
Yeah.
Mark Fields got up there and started saying that Ford is a company that's in the mobility business, that we're no longer, you know, focused on building cars, but that we're focused on selling mobility. And Tommy, what was it like when you were in that press conference when it turned into mobility, this TED Talk basically?
Well, they basically showed a title of Bronco and Ranger, and they kind of had this footage of, you know, just a straight shot in Moab with Ranger and Bronco across the screen. Everyone was so excited. There was like this buzz in the air. But they thought they were going to show us the vehicles at the end of the conference after the kind of the mobility talk. So everyone waited. They were on the edge of their seat, and then it just kind of ended, and there was no Bronco or Ranger reveal.
No, 22 seconds later, it was a WTF moment. No, 22 seconds later, we were done with the Bronco and the Ranger.
Yeah.
And we went into this TED Talk where they showed us these pod cars driving in a fictional street, right? And I just went...
Just like their Super Bowl ad this year, that was just kind of like not really showcasing anything that they've really actually been doing. It's just more of like an inspirational thing that they're aspiring to, and it's like, well, that's cool and all, but that should be a very small part.
So why did Ford or Mark Fields try to turn Ford into a mobility company? That's the question. Because what happened was the automakers are seeing the future, right? They're seeing that in the future we will have autonomous cars, and so by transforming the company from actually building cars to a mobility, which is really what, guys? A technology company, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He tried to position Ford as a technology company because Wall Street rewards technology companies. Now the question, of course, is why does Wall Street reward technology companies and not traditional car manufacturers? Anybody can answer that? Any of our smart young staff here? Any of you guys can answer that? I can answer that. So
Yeah.
the automobile business is long established and profits are very tight, right? So when you have to actually build a car, there's only so much incremental profit that you can make. And so if you're in the Wall Street business, there's only so much upside, because there's not, you can build more units, but the profits are the same no matter how many more units you build, and it's very competitive. Now, if you're selling technology, think about what software is, right? You're not actually building anything, all you're doing is copying code.
Right, yeah, it's
And-
not material, it's immaterial.
And the incremental cost of, let's say, taking a game like Forza and copying it are, almost zero. And so there's a lot more upside to tech companies than there is to traditional manufacturing companies. And so Wall Street decided that they didn't like traditional manufacturing companies, and they rewarded tech companies. So that is why, and here's like the bombshell moment of this entire day, I suppose, that is why Tesla's value is greater than Ford's value, believe it or not.
Wow.
Tesla, which is losing, I think something like last time I checked, $400 million a quarter, or is it a month? Either a quarter or a month, I'm not precise, but they're losing millions of dollars, is now valued more than, at least on Wall Street, than Ford. And the reason for that is because they're the darlings of Wall Street. So Mark saw that and he said, hey, you know what, let's make Ford a tech company. And it didn't work. Ford sales slumped. What's of course keeping Ford afloat is the fact that the F-150 is America's...
Well, it's not only the F-150 actually,
yeah,
it's
but
the
that's-
F-Series truck
trucks,
line
right.
is really what's saving Ford right now.
Yeah, their trucks are a bright spot. But in general, we've had this huge amount of growth over the last 6 years. So we went from, like I say, 10 million units a year, which was horrible, from 16 to 10, and now we're back up to about, I think last year we were just at 17 million units a year. And so car sales for the last 6 years have been on a steep incline, but now they're leveling off, and some say they're even starting to flatten out. And in that kind of a environment, Ford is not doing well. In general, car sales are down about 10% across the industry. Ford car sales and small crossovers are down 30%. And I think it was that fact that was the death bell for, right, he's retiring for Mark Fields. But yeah, so the company is hurting in a time when it should be doing well.
Yeah.
Uh,
Are there any questions out there from people?
Not so much that I've seen. I've seen just a lot of people saying hello from wherever they are on the globe. So hi from Colorado. I have a question here. Is Ford scared of the ZR2?
Well, actually, that's a question I can't answer because I don't know what the heck Ford is thinking when it comes to the ZR2. But that does bring another option to the table, and that is, of course, we can talk about the fact that Ford, and actually this is Mark Field's baby, the GT, right? So Ford decided to build the ultimate supercar,
Yeah.
the Ford GT. Of course, if you guys know the history of Ford and Formula One racing,
One of the
Ford,
most legendary
Yeah,
race
yeah.
cars out there.
yeah, Ford
Absolutely
tried to
gorgeous.
actually buy Ferrari at one point, and the deal got almost done, but then in the end they didn't buy Ferrari, and then Ford decided that they could beat Ferrari at their own game, and they, with the help of Shelby, of course, did so, and then to commemorate that victory, they built the original GT, and now I'm kind of quickly summing through this history. Now they built the new GT, and there's an issue with the new GT, and that is they're only building, they had said 1,000 of them.
Yeah.
And the weird thing, here's the weird thing about the GT. There was a very unique process to be able to actually buy one. I actually have two friends who are buying them because they're journalists, and the reason they were able to buy them, and these are expensive cars, let's not joke ourselves, $450,000 for
Yeah.
a GT. The reason they were able to buy them was because Ford decided that they had enough social and, I guess, publicity that they would be able to promote the car. Which is also really weird because think about what Ford is, right? Ford started by building the Model T. This is a car that is the everyman car if there was one, right? This is the ultimate everyman car, and yet
Yeah.
there's this company building this hyper exotic, exclusive car that they won't even, they're using Ferrari's business plan, which is you guys have to be good Ford customers, and if we like you, and if you jump through enough hoops, we will give you the opportunity to go down a list to be able to actually buy the car. And that to me seems absolutely the wrong strategy for Ford. It's the right strategy for Ferrari, right? But Ferrari's in the business of
Well,
selling
I'm going to
expensive
take a
cars.
counterpoint on that because I kind of disagree.
Okay.
I think the GT is this very exclusive
It's a halo car.
Yeah, it's carbon fiber tub. It's got this, EcoBoost V6 that produces 600 horsepower. It's got all this new tech. I really think it actually is a good idea that they keep that a limited production. It's a supercar. It's a supercar. Ford, I don't think should be in the market of selling 10, 20, 30,000 supercars. They want to keep it exclusive.
Why are
I
they in the
completely agree.
supercar market to begin with? Why is
Well,
Ford...
they need a halo car.
Why?
Because, they're this massive company. Ford has this long history with the GT. They've done it in the past. I think they need a halo car.
I think Ford is an everyman company, and what they really need is to sell a lot more cars. And here's the other thing about Ford, which I think is unusual, right? Look at other brands, like pick a brand, Toyota, Mercedes, whatever you want to pick, right?
Yeah.
And there's a sense with all those brands that whether you buy, let's say Audi, whether you buy an A3 or a Q7 or a A7, right? You're getting kind of the same quality. But with Ford, there's definitely a sense, at least that I feel, that you're getting more engineering time and talent spent on some vehicles than on others. And what I mean by that is they seem to pick favorites, right? Like favorite children. So if you buy a F-Series truck, or if you buy a Mustang, there is no doubt that Ford put a lot of time, talent, and tech into that. But if you buy a Taurus, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that they've put the same amount of love and care and attention to that vehicle. It's sitting at the back of the dealership.
Yeah,
And that's the problem to me with the GT, right? They put a lot of time, talent, and effort into the GT, and maybe that time, talent, and effort should have gone into the Escape. Because that's the part of the market that's red hot right now. It's all those crossovers. And instead of rebranding a Brazilian vehicle and bringing it up here because they didn't have anything in that small segment, in that small compact crossover segment, maybe they should develop something specifically for that instead of throwing all this money building a supercar that they're selling to 1,000 of their best friends. And they did a launch of that vehicle recently. They did it in Salt Lake City, and that's another thing. They play favorites when it comes to kind of who they invite. And all manufacturers do that. Don't get me wrong, right? It's hard to get on that list, and it's hard to stay on the list. And we're very grateful that we get invited on a lot of these car launches. That's because you guys are watching, and we have a big audience. But they all play favorites. But with Ford, they are very specific about who they invite, and it kind of feels like if you're not invited, like you're getting the backside of.
Here's a good question.
Yeah.
What reason do you think the Ford crossover sales are slumping? Is it because of new SUVs being rolled out from Japanese companies, such as the new CR-V, which has a 43% increased sales today, or what's going on there?
I think a
Some
lot of that
guesstimate.
is due to the fact that the pie is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and there are so many more options in that SUV market. I mean, that is such a red hot segment. All the manufacturers are pouring so much energy into that segment. And I think it's kind of like what we were talking about in our ZR2 video with the Tacoma, and that the pie is getting bigger, and that their slice of the pie is starting to narrow down a little bit.
So even though there's more people buying the vehicle, their segment, their slice of that segment is getting smaller. Well, let's talk about the Ford crossovers, right? I mean, they've got the Explorer, which is coming out anew, and they did pretty well with that, right? The Explorer is kind of their bread and butter.
Well, it's a big seller.
Yeah, I think in terms of the Escape, it's probably a little too small, right? The CR-V is out there, which directly competes, much bigger. The RAV4 is out there, right? And they've kind of refreshed the Escape, but not really done enough to actually make it competitive in that segment, in that super hot segment. They also have the Flex, which is,
Do they still make the Flex for
yeah,
17?
sure. Yeah, I think so.
Are we sure? What about the Edge?
And of course they have the Edge as well, which isn't selling very well. So you've got basically out of that entire kind of segment, you've got one car, which is the Explorer, that's selling well, and of course their trucks. The big,
I think Escape's selling pretty well too, though.
it's okay, but
Yeah.
it's not up there with CR-V, which is a market leader, and RAV4, which comes in next.
I think the one question that has left me scratching my head for a long time, and a lot of you guys too, is in 2011, Ranger was killed. And this was a big truck for them, and the Ranger line died, and they'll tell you it was because it was cannibalizing sales from F-150, right? And they wanted to put that effort into F-150, draw those sales toward that vehicle. But take a look what's happened recently. We've got Colorado now. We've got Canyon. And these are two big players now in the mid-sized truck segment.
Yeah, GM.
Yeah, GM. And this is big Shakeup in the mid-sized truck segment that was at one time owned pretty exclusively by Tacoma.
Yeah, that was a head scratcher for me too. They killed the Ranger, and then maybe it was 2010. I don't know.
11. I think 11 was the last year for Ranger.
Or 2012. I went to Geneva, and I'm like walking around the Geneva Auto Show, and I do a double. I walk in the Ford booth, and I go, wait, what is that? And it said Ford Ranger Wild Track. I'm like, why did they kill it in the U.S. and why are they still building it in Europe, right? So they refreshed it. They kept it alive in Europe. In other parts of the world, Mexico actually has it.
Australia has it,
South America, but they didn't bring it in here, and they wanted to just concentrate on the big trucks. And the problem, of course, is nothing wrong with the F-150, but the fact is, if you live in a city where most people, let's face it, live, right? Most people don't live out in Texas, even though that's where most trucks are sold. Most people live in cities. That's just a big truck, and it's hard to park, it's hard to maneuver, it's hard to live with. and a mid-sized truck seems to be a much better answer for a lot of people.
Well, I guess it would be back then Dodge with the Dakota too. That was killed around the same time as well.
They had other issues.
Yeah, I know.
The Ranger had a big
but
following.
the point is they didn't refresh Dakota. You can't go out to your dealership and buy a 2017
Right.
Dodge Dakota.
Right, I agree. So they did something that their competitor did as well. But you know, GM jumped in with both feet in the mid-sized truck market, and they're selling
Well,
every one they can build. Yeah. Any questions?
None really so far. We had one saying that should Ford build a sub $100,000 sports car to compete with Porsche, which is an interesting thought, but
Yeah, but I mean they built the Mustang, right? That's
yeah.
that's another strategy that was very strange in part of Ford. So me and Tommy were in the Detroit Auto Show this year, and something really strange happened there. I get a phone call from Ford, which is great, and they said, "Hey, we're rolling out a new Mustang, and this is a refreshed Mustang, so it's not a brand new Mustang, but it's nevertheless one of the most iconic cars that is anywhere, right? And one of the world's most iconic cars. I was going to say in America, but it's a worldwide iconic
Yeah.
car." And they said, "We're refreshing it, and we want you to come to our headquarters to take a look at it." I'm like, "Dude, I mean, there's 2,000 of the world's journalists here at the Detroit Auto Show, and you want me to go off-site?" So we went, and this year at Detroit, there were, every year at Detroit, at most auto shows, there's a star or two. And this year, the stars at the Detroit Auto Show were what, Tommy?
this year at Detroit?
Yeah, it was the Camry
Yep.
and the Stinger. Those were the only two. The Camry, of course, because it's the most popular mid-size sedan.
Actually, Volkswagen with that ID Buzz concept really created some waves too. That was pretty neat. That little Volkswagen van that they did.
Okay, I'll go with
No,
that.
they did genuinely. That was such a cool vehicle. That was.
Here's a good question. Here's a good question from Gary. Says, has Ford gone too far with technology in their trucks?
Yeah, we'll answer that in a second. So anyway, I will, but let me finish this. So they don't launch the Mustang at the Detroit Auto Show where you at the World's Press. They call me off-site and then they say you can't videotape it. So I'm like, really? That's what I do. Why are we here? And then they launched it a week later. But if they had actually unveiled it at the Detroit Auto Show,
It would have been huge.
yeah, it would have been huge. You would have owned the show. The whole world would have known about it instead, which seemed odd to me. So has Ford gone too far with their tech? I think Ford's in the same place that everybody else is. No one's really out there, except for Tesla. Tesla is way out there, but
in their truck tech, that was specifically about truck tech.
Well, what?
Truck tech,
Yeah, like what kind of truck tech?
Well, think the automatic backup assist.
Yeah, but all that stuff is actually smart. I think the automatic backup assist, where you can actually mount cameras and look.
What about like in the heavy duty trucks? Kent's always talking about this. All their cameras. They've got cameras all over that truck. He calls it the camera truck because they're in the front, the sides, and the back, and on the beds. And
I think that's all
over.
great. I think that gets more people into that truck because then they feel like I need to tow, but I'm scared to tow. But now I've got this technology that helps me back up the truck. And so before that was a limiter to people buying it, and now they've eliminated that limiter.
What about EcoBoost? Because
I
there's a
think
lot of talk online about, I know it's several years old now.
I think EcoBoost was brilliant. I think Ford was ahead of the game with the turbocharged technology. They were there first in trucks. They were there first in a lot of their cars. They came out with actually a 1-liter turbo, which was pretty innovative at the time.
Yeah, and the Fiesta.
Yeah, and the truck, of course, is a 2.7 and a 3.5 twin turbos. And before the whole world went and just every car now is like a 2-liter turbo. Before any of that happened, Ford was there first. So I think that they were, and that was quite honestly all from Alan Maloney under his administration. That goes back more than 3 years.
Yeah, that goes back a while.
Yeah.
The EcoBoost tech.
Yeah. Any other questions?
None so far.
Okay.
Keep on looking.
All right. So Ford is struggling right now. They're trying to find their way, and one of the ways that you, of course, do that is you shake up the management and you get new leadership in. So we'll see how this changes Ford's
approach.
Yeah, approach and sales. Tell me what if I were to ask you what Ford vehicles would you want to buy right now? That's kind of a good way to look at how. I'll ask both of you guys. What if you were your money, what Ford vehicles would you go and buy?
Well, I know you.
GT350.
I know you.
100%.
Mustang. I got a
Yes.
Mustang. Yeah.
I know you don't like that GT, but that GT was.
I like it. I'm not saying I don't like it.
Well-
I'm like questioning why Ford is
Well,
building.
think about it. Okay, Ford had several Halo vehicles. Raptor, right? That was introduced. All this buzz.
I agree with that.
And then Focus RS. All this buzz.
Yep.
And then GT350R around that same time. All this buzz. Ford needed to top those vehicles. How do you top a GT350R? How do you top a Raptor? Come up with a GT.
Yeah, maybe it's smart. You know, I mean, the theory that you need the halo vehicle to help build the brand and promote the strategy has been around a long time. I'm just kind of wondering why a company that is built on selling cars to the masses is selling and putting a lot of time, effort, energy into this supercar for the richest people.
Why did they do that in the 60s?
Yeah, and you could argue that Ford struggled in the 60s as well because of that, right? Because why, I mean, why is Ford getting in a pissing match with Ferrari? It makes no sense, right? This is a company that is I would think, you know, much head and shoulders bigger than Ferrari. Ferrari's a little teeny tiny company, and it still is a little teeny tiny company.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So yeah, it's big news at Ford. We've got a lot of shakeups that are happening. Any other questions, Charlotte?
We have some people on here wondering why Ford is one of the only companies turbocharging trucks.
I don't think that's going to last very long. I think other companies are going to see that soon we're going to have more turbocharged trucks coming. I know that, especially for instance, Jeep, there should be a turbo coming in the Jeep, and it might be available in the new pickup version of that. So there might be a new pickup version with the turbo in the Jeep. Of course, the Baby Duramax diesel in Canyon,
diesel,
Colorado, that's a turbocharged diesel. So so they're not the only ones actually doing turbochargers.
Definitely.
And GM, I don't know what GM is doing with their engine and powertrains, where they're coming from. They stuck with the kind of traditional 6.2, doing cylinder deactivation as a way. I mean, all this was driven by not just power, but by fuel economy, right? So Ford's rationale for doing the turbochargers was you can get the fuel economy and power of a V8 you can get the fuel economy of a V6 with the power of a V8 by going with the turbocharger.
Well, the question is, and a lot of you guys will comment on this out there too, is that EcoBoost MPG in the real world sometimes isn't stellar. I mean, we did that Raptor towing video.
Turbos are thirsty when you get into the.
So they call it EcoBoost,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of boost, but in a lot of cases there's not necessarily a lot of eco going on.
Yeah, I like that. It's true.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
Well, the other thing too is I'm really curious to see when we'll start seeing turbocharged gassers in the heavy duty trucks, because Ford still uses that big old 6.2, right, in the 250. GM's got that old 6-liter in the 2500.
And Ram's got the 6.4.
And Ram's got the 6.4 or the 5.7 in the base model, but still big old V8s in those heavy duty trucks. You know, I'm excited to see if Ford's gonna maybe start looking at doing an EcoBoost in the 250s.
I think that there'll be you know, when Alan Mulally was at Ford, there seemed to be a real big push toward kind of the bread and butter vehicles. So he put a lot of time and talent into the F-Series trucks, but he also, you know, the new Fusion came out under him, which actually did really well in that mid-size in the mid-size market. And then of course under him we had the new Focus, the Fiesta, right, which were actually European vehicles that were brought over to America.
Right.
You know, I think you make money in the car biz by selling a lot of cars, like hundreds of thousands and not by thousands. So I'm guessing that Ford maybe, I'm guessing, this is pure speculation, maybe focusing more kind of on their bread and butter models as opposed to on the RS, which is bad for us because I love the RS, I love the ST version of the Focus, you know, I love the fact that there is a GT out there, but I'm not sure that makes money for a company. I think what makes money is selling a lot of crossovers.
Yeah, you're
So
right.
to wrap it all up, basically this main question that keeps coming up is, so like, what are the implications of this shakeup and the top echelons of Ford's management? What do you think is going to happen with all this?
That's a great question. So I personally believe that all the car companies, not just Ford, got way ahead of the game when it came to autonomous technology. I hate autonomous technology. It scares the out of me because I love driving, and the fact that getting in like a Woody Allen kind of pod car where you're just sitting there as a passenger. Yeah, look, the companies are going to spin it, right? They're going to say, hey, you can get online and work and, you know, relax. But what's going to happen is it's going to be like the bus, because let's face it. So here's how it makes sense, and here's how it doesn't make sense, right? If you take a vehicle and you put it on the highway, it uses a lot of fuel. But if you take 10 vehicles and put them 5 feet apart or 2 feet apart on the highway, they use a lot less fuel, right? So that's a fuel economy argument. You can use a lot less fuel, and then you go off the highway and go wherever you want. But take that logic to its next step. Just put a bunch of people on a bus, right? And what makes mobility scary, what makes autonomy scary, is that you're commoditizing what I love, which is driving. And a great example, at least the way I look at it, might be look at the airline industry, right? I wasn't around back when like airlines started, but you see those like commercials where like people are sitting across from each other, and there are these very elegant flight attendants who are bringing in martinis. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, my grandma was flying.
Yeah, right. It was cool, right? And now you get on an airplane, and it's like, whoa, right? People are fighting, and you're like, I'm like this. It's just miserable because
all these recent scandals.
yeah, we have commoditized. We have made flying a commodity instead of an experience, and so it's all about getting as much money out of it as possible. And I think that's what autonomy and mobility are about. Right? It's not about like, hey, I can go, have like for instance, one of the ways that mobility works is you can potentially have an agreement with, let's pick your favorite brand, BMW. And instead of buying a BMW, you have an agreement with BMW where they bring the BMW to you.
Yeah, it's like ride sharing.
Right, ride sharing, right? Or autonomously is driven to you. That's the perfect world. I don't see it that way. I see us all crammed into buses or Woody Allen little bubble cars. And instead of being able to drive like classic trucks like this, we're gonna have to go to some like park in Wyoming to get into a Mustang and actually drive it.
Sure.
And I think people realize that, and I think the car companies got way ahead of where people were. People love cars, because cars represent freedom, they represent kind of your personality, in some ways they represent sex, right? That's what people do in cars. And so they do, because that's where you can be alone. And so it represents all these really good things, and mobility takes all that off the table.
Here's the thing that scares me though. To your generation, it absolutely did.
Yeah.
It was about freedom.
Not just mine, the previous and the previous.
And the previous, and I love that. I love that aspect. But to a lot of millennials like us, it doesn't mean that.
You
I
agree?
mean, I've got a lot of friends who don't drive whatsoever. They don't have their driver's license. And Charlotte's the head of the CU Car Club, so that's going to be different. So
I just graduated. I used to be.
yeah, a lot of the people you know do.
Yeah.
But like a lot of just kind of the ordinary people at CU Boulder, they don't have any interest in driving. A lot of them don't have their driver's license. They're fine taking the bus. And that's kind of scary to me.
For young people in cities, but when you get out into the country, then and to towns where public transit isn't as good as Boulder, then you definitely have this sense of freedom and independence that you get from a car. What I'm worried about as far as autonomous driving goes is definitely going to be, well, can I still take my beautiful classic car on the highway to go see, my parents or some friends and go for a drive? And so I'm just kind of curious, how these autonomous systems are going to be mitigated. Are cars going to be driving 80 miles an hour, bumper to bumper, regulated by, like a satellite? Because that's the technology that, I see happening. And so with that, I'm just wondering, will there still be room for actual human input into the driving experience?
Yeah,
It's interesting.
Well, what's going to happen is you'll have a switch on the car, right? And
Yeah.
it'll be like, if you want to go into like cities like London, like they already do it, you'll
Yeah.
have to go autonomous. But my fear is that one day that switch will be mandated is going to go away, right?
Yeah,
Where you won't be able to turn it off.
That's what I'm worried
Some
about as
politician,
well.
some politician will say, this is
Computers,
true.
well, some politician will say computers don't make mistakes. To some extent.
So it used to be about 30,000 people died every year in car accidents. That's a big number, and that number has gone up significantly for the first time. And that's because of course, we're using to film this, and that is mobile technology, right?
Yeah.
People are now on their telephones, and a politician can say, hey, you could save 30, 40,000 lives every year if we make cars autonomous, and you can, and so bye-bye switch.
Sure.
Now we're driving pod cars.
Right.
Well, guys, thank you for watching today.
Yeah.
Really appreciate the chance to kind of talk about Ford and where Ford is going. It's a big shakeup for us, in the video, leave us your comments below. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are regarding Ford and how you think the company is doing and why you think the company is kind of shaken up and changed leadership. As always, this is Roman
And Tommy.
And Charlotte.
saying, see you guys next time. Remember, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday we go live with TFL Today. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.